The sight of the vast emptiness of space where his planet should have been left Wave's mind in a jumbled mess. He struggled to concentrate, his eyes bulging, searching for a reason to explain how his life had become this screwed up in a matter of hours. He was beyond speechless. He was even thoughtless, as his brain struggled to grasp onto anything that would make sense. As he stood there with his mouth mumbling incoherently, opening and closing, yet saying nothing, his brain was moving at hyperspeed to come up with a solution. Then, like a gun clicking in the hammer of a gun chamber, one primed to fire, words surfaced to the top of his thoughts. Ship. This has to be a ship. And if it could take him away, it damn sure could take him back. Wavy! A voice said out loud from behind him. Koto! Wave called out, struggling to keep his voice even and nonchalant, hoping whoever was behind him would assume he was talking to someone else. She was about 50 feet away from him. He turned his head slightly and said over his shoulder, "No saber-tooth vibes allowed. Don't come near me. No means no. The only thing I want to hear from you is that you're dropping me back off where you found me." He began to beat feet through the crowds of women who were actively now trying to get a hold of him. Some of the women had claws that grew from regular-sized nails to the size of daggers. His heart pounded in his chest as he weaved through the throng of alien women, their exotic scents and alluring forms doing little to distract him from his desperate goal. He needed to find the controls of this ship, the source of this unnatural abduction. The walls of the vessel seemed to pulse with an eerie, organic light, casting disconcerting shadows that danced and writhed around him. The air thrummed with a low, resonant hum, a vibration that seemed to penetrate his very bones. It was a symphony of alien technology, a lullaby of the unknown that threatened to overwhelm his senses. He pushed aside the rising panic, clinging to the vestiges of logic and reason that remained. He had to remind himself that he was not a helpless pawn in some cosmic game. He was Wave, a survivor, a fighter. He would not succumb to fear or despair. He would find a way back home, even if it meant facing the unknown terrors of this bizarre vessel. His eyes darted from one alien inscription to another, searching for any symbol that might resemble a control panel or navigational system. He had to believe that there was a way to pilot this ship, to reverse its course and return to the familiar embrace of his home planet. The ship seemed to be alive, its corridors pulsating with an organic rhythm. He could sense a consciousness within the vessel, a sentience that observed his every move. He felt a growing unease, a primal fear of being hunted, of being a specimen in an alien zoo. He pressed on, his determination fueled by a mixture of fear and defiance. He refused to become another victim, another curiosity in this alien menagerie. He would break free from this cosmic prison, even if it meant challenging the very fabric of this vessel's reality. The corridors twisted and turned, leading him deeper into the labyrinthine depths of the ship. He felt a growing sense of disorientation, as if the vessel itself was trying to confuse and disorient him. But he pressed on, his resolve unwavering. He stumbled upon a chamber that pulsed with an intense light, a beacon in the alien darkness. As he approached, he could see a console covered in intricate symbols, a control panel that seemed to beckon him closer. He reached out, his fingers trembling with anticipation, and touched the glowing surface. A jolt of energy surged through his body, and the symbols on the console began to shift and change. The chamber hummed with power, and Wave felt a strange connection to the ship, a sense of understanding that transcended language. He realized that he could communicate with the vessel, that he could perhaps control it. Without another second to think about what was happening, and maybe because he still had this gang of women chasing him like he had usher backstage passes with a guarantee of $1 million and a mansion, Wave reacted. In moments like this, when things turned into a shit show type of situation and his strength was waning, he thought back on Sendero, his teacher. No, teacher doesn't seem right to describe him, more like the man he had to survive and fight for his life for 9 years until he was deemed worthy of being an assassin. Wave thought to himself passingly, "I was top of my class." Not that he was flexing, it was more of a necessity because he was the only person to graduate from his class. Everyone else died. The only good fact of the time spent there he could remember is that at least he didn't kill all of them. The challenges did most of that, like, let's see who can outrun the starving tigers in the jungle, or his favorite, what goes bump in the dark. A man, who seemed more like a monster, who taught him how to turn weakness into strength and how to turn others' strength into their weakness. That thought gave him an idea that he acted on in a split second as he ducked two razor-sharp swipes that went over his head and hit the pursuing person on the other side. With the blows, he swept the floor with his right leg, tripping several of the monster women, and then, with a roll and a spring-up sprint, he ran on top of the ones on the floor, raising up with every step, climbing the women, taking swipes at him, feet making contact with arms, boobs, necks, and heads, as he continued his mad sprint, which most would be terrified by, but Wave had to admit was getting exciting. It's not anything he could explain to you, really. You only know if you ever felt it before. A feeling that's out on the edge of madness and sanity and makes your hair stand on end and shit diamonds. He could only ride the wave as a slightly demented smile played across his lips. A monster girl that jumped up fast above the crowd from below and took swipes at him with her claws that slashed at him was promptly popped in the face with a kick, or punch. It was a combination of both that sent her crashing back down into the crowd, knocking multiple monster girls down on the way. But the body with wings didn't think it was over because Wave reached down, snatching her up by her hair and pulling her head close to him so that he was whispering in her ear, "If you don't want to die, I suggest you flap those wings." And for every monster girl that gripped his ankles and tried to pull him down, with a circular tuck and roll motion, they were brought up like a windmill and met with a crossover kick that sent them spinning off into the distance, like a spinning top flying through the air, just above the heads of the other monster girls below that were still clawing and fighting themselves to be the one to grab hold of Wave. With the amount of chaos going on around him, he never released the flying monster girl he captured, and his face and lips were still pressed up against her ear. He said it one more time. "If you want to live, I suggest you start flapping those wings." From the split second when he first saw her, he had an idea. Of brilliance or madness, it was always hard to tell between the two, but either she was going to fly him to the control room on her back, or she was going to go face first into a mob of teeth and claws and probably ruin her facial day while he just stepped over her and moved on to the next one that could fly him to his destination. The sight that first caused this idea was when he first caught sight of this one, then another and another, women with wings flapping, hovering in the air before him. Each one of them had a slightly different wind pattern and colors. Some were the color of summer rain, some were blue, some were black, and some were the color of money. The shapes were an assortment of different shapes that looked like bat wings, and some looked like the wings of an angel, and some were in shapes that looked like they shouldn't even be able to fly, like spider webs and slim cylinder shapes. He felt a surge of adrenaline as the winged woman, spurred by his threats and the chaotic scene unfolding beneath them, began to ascend. Her powerful wings beat against the air, creating a whirlwind of motion that lifted them above the fray. Wave held on tight, his grip firm but not cruel, his eyes fixed on the swirling chaos below. He felt a thrill of exhilaration, a sense of freedom as they soared above the frenzied mob. The winged woman navigated through the throng of her fellow creatures, her wings expertly guiding them through the chaotic airspace. Wave, perched precariously on her back, felt a strange sense of camaraderie with his captor. They were, for this brief moment, allies in a desperate escape, bound together by a shared desire for survival. He clung to her, his body pressed against her back, feeling the powerful muscles working beneath his grip. Wave then laid himself down, assuming a prone position on her back. He began his slide as she banked right, using his one free hand to steady himself by crossing his body and grabbing her hips. His hand gripped her buttocks out of necessity more than pleasure, even though it satisfied both conditions, as her wings flapped wildly in agreement or protest. He didn't know. After the hard turn, he sat up straight to get a better position and kept a tight hold of her long blonde hair like a jockey would. Similarly, he reached his free hand up high and brought it down right on her buttocks. She let out a high-pitched squeal, and it caused her wings to arch up and come down in a powerful motion, sending them rocking forward. "Wave! Wave!" He thought he heard one of the monster girls' voices in the background. "Get the prize!" one of the monster girls yelled out. Whatever that meant. What's the prize? This question mark me? He guessed. someone lied to them, unless the prize was that they wanted someone or something dead. Then, yeah, he would be the greatest prize. All thoughts left his mind as he yanked on his new ride's hair hard to the left, because they were heading straight for the solid wall. But it was already too late. They were seconds away from becoming smears on the pearl black wall. Or so he thought. As he watched their reflection in hyper slow motion, he braced himself for the next thing he would have to overcome. For him, the hard way was always a certainty. Wave watched what was about to happen with his eyes open. He never was the type to close his eyes and wait for doom to happen. He'd rather look his killer in the eyes or just watch life try to screw him over for the umpteenth time. But surprisingly, the pearl black wall began to split and open like a Walmart automated door, making him squint his eyes because of the brilliant light. After his eyes adjusted, he saw a room that was almost beyond description. Jet black marble floors stretched as far as he could see, with what looked to be a golden mountain off in the distance, cascading waterfalls with water that shimmered like liquid silver. The water fell into pools of pure black, spilling out onto the pearl black floors, with steam rising everywhere. But the most striking thing in the room was the beautiful bodies that surrounded the area. Women's bodies in every direction. In fact, everywhere you looked, there were wall-to-wall naked women, totally naked. All were baddies in that great way, like Tony the Tiger would say. As Wave began to calm down and relax a bit, he looked over and noticed the angel-winged lady that was flying him. She was very pretty, and she was looking at him like she wanted that work-all-night action. His brain began to fall over more and forgot all about Earth and everything else. At this point, only one thing was beginning to rise in his mind. First, it was a distant echo. Then, building in intensity, he heard the sergeant yelling his name like always, and his wits came back to him long enough to slide off of the angel-winged lady. But what he fell into next was so soft, so warm, and if he had to guess, tasted like honey. The big bosom of a wolf girl broke his fall, his face taking the brunt of the luscious melons, knocking the wolf girl to the ground. He quickly reached around to cup the back of her head as they fell to the ground, him on top of her. He lifted up and took in all that she was. Instinctively, he scanned her body. She looked totally human except for her legs, which were slightly more hairy than the average woman, but not fully covered. The hair ran up and stopped just above the hip, where, in the middle, were her second pair of lips. He forced his eyes to race up to not get carried away. Why was he even thinking like this? The wolf girl lay there, eyes locked with Wave. He then shifted to get up but slipped on a wet surface and fell again into her. This time her own arms shot up and wrapped around him as his hands slipped between her legs into that wet softness. Her body touched up and gripped him as he laid there. He talked to himself. She doesn't seem to not like it. She won't let me get up. And just before she was about to utter the words, "Don't stop," he cut her off and began to move his fingers in a circular come-hither motion, causing her to moan loudly. Out of nowhere, howls, whistles, catcalls, and cheers started coming from the background. "Oh boy, kiss my ass and call me Snow White." "Yeah, he's quick on the upbeat." The cheers and howling became louder. "Better not let Rolanda see what he is doing to the princess. Like she isn't enjoying herself." More deep moans came from the wolf princess, deep moaning sounds from the background of the crowd. A wolf woman with cream-colored light fur that went from the tops of her feet all the way to the cup of her buttocks, and a black and white tail sticking out, swaying in the cool, forward momentum of her strides as she parted the crowds in front of her. She was a tall, 6-foot walking work of art. She continued her cool, forward stride, pushing a few more of the cheering crowd out of the way, and then she saw it, Wave's bizarre exhibition. Her chestnut-colored eyes threw fire with what she saw, and with her quivering mouth that raised an octave every second, she yelled, "You scum! What are you doing to Princess Rose?" This was Rolanda, the princess's guard, and she was not amused. Her anger radiated outwards like a physical force, silencing the cheers and causing the crowd to part like the Red Sea. Wave, momentarily startled by the interruption, looked up to see Rolanda looming over him, her expression a mixture of fury and disgust. He knew instantly that he was in trouble. Rolanda reached them in 3 large strides and, without a word, grabbed Wave by the hair and lifted him high above her head. He hung there, helpless, his feet dangling above the ground. Rolanda's eyes blazed with fury, her fangs glinting in the dim light. The crowd went silent, anticipating the punishment that was sure to come. Wave braced himself, his mind racing, trying to calculate his odds of survival. He knew he had to act fast, but what could he do against such a powerful opponent? He twisted and turned in Rolanda's grasp, trying to find a weakness, an opening. He considered his options. He could try to appeal to her reason, but that seemed unlikely to succeed given her current state of rage. He could try to fight back, but that would probably only make things worse. He could try to escape, but where could he run? He was surrounded by a crowd of curious onlookers, and the exit was blocked by the imposing figure of Rolanda. As Rolanda raised her free hand to strike, Wave noticed a flicker of movement in the crowd. The winged woman, who had been observing the scene with growing concern, swooped down from above, her claws extended. She aimed for Rolanda's back, hoping to distract her and give Wave a chance to escape.